Ulfric Stormcloak! For Skyrim!
For Skyrim!
I fight for the men I've held in my arms, dying on foreign soil. I fight for their wives and children whose names I heard whispered in their last breath. I fight for we few who did come home, only to find our country full of strangers wearing familiar faces. I fight for my people, impoverished to pay the debts of an empire too weak to rule them, yet brands them criminals for wanting to rule themselves. I fight so that all the fighting I've already done hasn't been for nothing. I fight because I must.
So, very briefly before we begin, I mostly make videos on my channel about Elder Scrolls Legends, and I wanted to begin a new series on the channel which will focus on a particular card and discuss all of the lore about that card before showcasing how the card relates to its counterpart in the story. I thought that a great starting point would be none other than Ulfric Stormcloak, since he has an abundance of lore written about him in-game. I'll be releasing a Legends video as well that will build around Ulfric's card, so look out for that on the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. In the history of the Elder Scrolls franchise, there has never been a figure so polarizing as Ulfric Stormcloak. Many Skyrim fans refer to him as a hero, a savior, and a champion of human rights, believe it or not. Ulfric is seen in the eyes of his followers, or Stormcloaks, as they've taken to calling themselves, as the true High King of Skyrim, and as such, he and his followers have effectively split Skyrim in half. One side supports the Imperial Empire, who have ruled over Skyrim for around 635 years at this point, while the other supports Ulfric in rebellion to the Empire, upset with their changes in law and leadership since the Great War ended around 26 years before the start of Skyrim. Both sides do have valid arguments, and I will attempt to show them in as unbiased a way as possible. Before we get into the bloody civil war that is plaguing Skyrim and current events, we should attempt to learn as much as possible about Ulfric Stormcloak as we can. Ulfric is of the clan Stormcloak, which is a clan that has existed since the Merethic era and has ties to the founding of the city of Windhelm, according to Thane Mira Stormcloak in Elder Scrolls Online. However, this does contradict the Songs of the Return, Volume 19, a book that was introduced in Elder Scrolls V, which states that the city was built by elven captives. So if you don't take ESO as canon, I would doubt the veracity of this claim. His father was Hoag Stormcloak, the Jarl of Eastmarch, also known as the Bear of Eastmarch, which meant Ulfric was something of royalty in his youth. Despite this, in dialogue with Ulfric, he tells us that the Greybeards chose him to learn the Way of the Voice when he was a boy. He spent 10 years of his life at High Hrothgar, the home of the Greybeards, before leaving the fortress to fight on behalf of the Empire during the Great War, from 4th Era 171 to 175. The Greybeards mentored him and thus taught him the Way of the Voice, which is why later in game there are many references to Ulfric's shouting capabilities. Right from the beginning of the game, in fact, you see that Ulfric is gagged in Helgen before his execution. Now, this is really stupid because the way that it's shown here, he could just pull the gag down. It's just a piece of cloth around his mouth, not in it, and his hands aren't really bound well, but that's beside the point. When I was a kid, the first time I played this game, I thought this gag was in his mouth to prevent him from voicing his mind and inciting a riot in the streets of Helgen. While this is certainly an added benefit of muzzling him, it is truly there to keep him from shouting. Unrelenting Force and Disarm are the only two shouts that Ulfric knows, but even these two abilities set him far above what the average person could do. So we know that he can shout. Ulfric Stormcloak set off to fight in the Great War, presumably when it began, in 4th Era 171, alienating himself from the Greybeards and leaving the Way of the Voice. This would set our timeline for him joining the Greybeards at 4th Era 161, since he himself proclaims he studied with them for 10 years. I would assume he was in his early 20s at this point of his life, but he could have been late 20s. It's fairly unclear about the time frame. During the war, the young Ulfric was captured by the Aldmeri Dominion during their assault on the Imperial City. The Dominion are the dominant political faction in the Somerset Isles and the ones who waged war with the Empire during the Great War. While captured, the Dominion learned that he was the son of the Jarl of Eastmarch and marked him as an asset. We'll come back to this word in a minute. Ulfric was interrogated by an Altmer woman by the name of Elenwen, who would later go on to become the ambassador or first emissary to Skyrim later in life. Ulfric, during his interrogation, was led to believe that information that he gave while under scrutiny was detrimental to the Empire in their loss of the Imperial City. In truth, the Imperial City had been captured long before he broke. The Thalmor, interestingly, let Ulfric escape. All of this information was obtained by one of the best lore items in the game, that being the Thalmor dossier, Ulfric Stormcloak. There is one particular part of this dossier that really stands out to me, and that is that Ulfric is pinned as an asset. Now, according to Google, the word asset has several definitions. Definition 1. A useful or valuable thing, person, or quality. Definition 2. Property owned by a person or company regarded as having value and available to meet debts, commitments, or legacies. And definition 3. Military equipment, such as planes, ships, communications, and radar installations, employed or targeted in military operations. Now, I don't know about you guys, but whenever I'd read this dossier before, I'd always assumed that the developers intended to describe Ulfric under definition 1. However, since doing more research into Ulfric, I'm more inclined to believe that they're leaning towards definitions 2 and 3, or perhaps some blend of all of them together. Words at the end of the day can't always express everything you want them to their fullest. Ulfric is certainly being treated as some sort of person of interest here, and they refer to him almost as though he is their property or just some piece of military equipment that is intended to be a disruption to the Empire. It's just something really interesting that I wanted to point out before we continued. So, Ulfric is a free man now, or at least so he thinks. There is another part that really has confused me since looking more into it though. The dossier claims that after the war, so after the signing of the White Gold Concordat on the 11th of Sun's Dusk, 4th Era 175, contact was established with Ulfric, and he had proven his worth as an asset. Isn't that interesting, given the multiple definitions of the word? I have a theory on what he was informed of by them, but contact was established how exactly, is my question. However, it seems that there's no clear answer to this question. I personally believe that they are using the term contacted loosely here, but I'm not sure. Outside of the dossier itself, which I am inclined to believe is true, nothing confirms nor denies this claim. I'm sure that if he was contacted and, in fact, working with the Thalmor at some point in his life, this would be a fact Ulfric would keep very close to his chest. But again, I have my doubts that a man who was interrogated and tortured by the Dominion would be a willing participant in anything that they suggest he do. Let's discuss what the end of the war meant for Skyrim very quickly. There was this treaty that was signed, I mentioned it briefly before, called the White Gold Concordat. To sum up the war, the Thalmor took a lot of land from Cyrodiil. Then they took over the imperial capital, the aptly named Imperial City. The Empire then had a rally against the Thalmor and retook the capital and much of the ground that they lost. The war was essentially somewhat of a stalemate in the end, but the Empire really was overpowered by the Dominion despite their victory in reclaiming the city. They definitely could not have withstood another wave of attacks from the Dominion. Both sides agreed that the best end to the conflict would be to sign a treaty. The treaty they wound up agreeing to, however, leaned heavily towards favoring the Aldmeri Dominion. The Empire had to renounce the worship of their deity Talos, disband the Emperor's personal guard, the Blades, and they had to concede portions of the province of Hammerfell to the Aldmeri Dominion. Despite these awful concessions, Emperor Titus Mede II signed the treaty. Many people believe that he did this to give the Empire time to recover its strength, but in truth, it may have done more harm than help. The part that really upset the Nords, and Ulfric specifically, was the ban on the worship of Talos. Before we can talk about Ulfric, though, we have to talk about Markarth, the Forsworn, and the Reach. We're going to veer off talking about them for a while, but I promise that this is important and foundational to Ulfric's story.
That is who we are. The Forsworn. Criminals in our own lands, and we will cut a bloody hole into the Reach until we are free.
So, during the Great War, a collective of Reachmen, a group of natives from the region of modern Skyrim known as the Reach, called the Forsworn, seized the opportunity of the Empire being engaged in war to take over the Reach capital of Markarth, which itself is an old Dwemer settlement. It's kind of funny how history works like that, huh? One group is always replacing the next. The Forsworn were successful in their attack on Markarth, and they overthrew the Nords living there, establishing a kingdom that lasted from 4th Era 174 to 4th Era 176. This kingdom, apparently, did not have a name that I could find. All of the information about it really comes from two sources, the Madmen of the Reach and the Bear of Markarth, which were both written by the same character, Arianus Arius, who is proclaimed to be an imperial scholar, one which you cannot meet in-game, in Elder Scrolls V, I should add. Generally, in history, and I have an undergraduate degree in history, so you can trust me, we would call these types of books secondary sources. Historical pieces of information are broken up into primary and secondary sources. A primary source about ancient Rome, for example, would be Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars, which were books that he wrote during his campaign in modern France. A secondary source would be something like this book here, SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome, written by Mary Beard. Primary sources, then, are pieces of evidence from a time period that you are researching. Secondary sources are sources of information written after the fact or something about the thing that you are researching. Essentially, a secondary source is secondhand information, and it's not a bad thing. You need researchers and scholars out there to compile primary sources in order to create new takes on old history. Believe it or not, history is not so stagnant a study as many would believe. It's often changing due to new ideas, perceptions, or worldviews on old events. Anyway, the works of Arianus Arius are, for the purpose of this video, secondary sources since he was not there during the events that we are boiling up to. Arius, however, clearly seems to have a bias in favor of the Reachmen in his writing. He writes that the kingdom of Reachmen, as I'll refer to it here, was one of peace and prosperity, although he does concede that there were a few crimes committed against former Nordic landowners in the city once it was taken back, or taken over, by the Reachmen. One semi-fringe thing that does back his claim up is a quote from Madanak, the king of the Kingdom of Reachmen, at the end of the questline in Elder Scrolls V that you can do with him in Sidna Mine, wherein he states, and I'm paraphrasing here, that once the fighting is done, he will reclaim the Reach and finally have peace.
Now, I announce to all of Markarth that I have returned. Don't worry about your name. They'll know who to blame and fear after today. It'll take years, but I'll organize the Forsworn again. We'll reclaim our land, and then when power is ours, we'll have peace. A kingdom.
By Arius' account, the Kingdom of Reachmen was actually on track to becoming recognized as a legitimate state by the Empire as of 4th Era 176, however, that was soon to change. Upon his release from captivity, Ulfric heard tell of the Forsworn uprising, as it would be known. I believe that this is the contact that the Thalmor dossier was referring to, by the way, pointing Ulfric in the right direction to stir up a bit of chaos, and stir up chaos he would. Ulfric, during this time, began recruiting a militia to take back the city. It is unclear, but since Arius reports that the Kingdom of Reachmen only lasted from 4th Era 174 to 4th Era 176, I think it is safe to assume that the ensuing battle was in 4th Era 176. This is a quote from the Bear of Markarth. Every official who worked for the Forsworn was put to the sword, even after they had surrendered. Native women were tortured to give up the names of Forsworn fighters who had fled the city or were in the hills of the Reach. Anyone who lived in the city, Forsworn and Nord alike, were executed if they had not fought with Ulfric and his men when they breached the gates. "You're with us, or you are against Skyrim," was the message on Ulfric's lips as he ordered the deaths of shopkeepers, farmers, the elderly, and any child old enough to lift a sword that had failed in the call to fight with him. So, if this is to be taken as fact, Ulfric's men assaulted the city and waged a war not only on the Forsworn engaged in the defense of the city, but also the citizens of the city themselves. Pretty messed up. Upon capturing the city and defeating Madonak, who we discussed previously was the king of the Kingdom of Reachman, Ulfric garrisoned his militia in the city until troops from the Empire arrived to reinstate imperial law to the Reach. Ulfric, however, refused to open the gates to the city until he was assured that the worship of Talos would be allowed in the city, which violated the treaty between the Empire and the Dominion. The Empire agreed, although Arius seems to believe that this is because they had no further choice. Later on, however, the Thalmor caught wind of the Talos worship in the Reach and persuaded the Jarl to have Ulfric imprisoned. The thing is, the Empire, and really all the Jarls and people in any position of imperial power, did not respect the ban on Talos worship. They were basically just doing it secretly, and they were hoping that the Thalmor would not catch wind of it. But when they finally did, not upholding the White Gold Concordat could have meant the Second Great War. So the then Jarl of Markarth, Jarl Hrolfdir, had to comply with Ulfric's jailing. Without another time given, I'm left to believe that Ulfric was locked up the same year that he took back Markarth, 4E176. It is important to note here as well that by the time the Markarth Incident had come to a close, he was deemed uncooperative and a dormant asset by the Thalmor. Ulfric was released from prison sometime after his father's death in 4th Era 183. We know that he delivered his father's eulogy via a letter that he wrote from prison, so we know that his release was not immediately after Hoag's death. This meant that he was imprisoned for nearly 7 years. Upon his release, he returned to Windhelm and took his father's place as the new Jarl. Shortly thereafter, the Stormcloak Rebellion began. During his reign within Windhelm, however, Ulfric was controversial, to say the least. It is unclear if this was a result from his interrogation or imprisonment, or if he was always like this, but regardless, Ulfric had become something of a Nord nationalist, upholding the phrase, Skyrim is for the Nords, and referring to his troops as the true sons and daughters of Skyrim. Ulfric began treating others who would try to live in the province as lesser. Under his rule, Windhelm was divided into 4 sections. The 2 that are most relevant for this discussion are the Grey Quarter and the Docks, located outside the city. The Grey Quarter is the name given to the section of the city that houses the Dunmer. In year 5 of the 4th Era, the great meteor, Bar Dao, which long hovered over the city of Vivec, finally collapsed. Bar Dao was halted by Lord Vivec, the former living god of Morrowind, and he had held the stone above the city for an age. But in his absence, the rock, maintaining its momentum from when it was thrown by Sheogorath, fell upon the citizens below. The impact left Vivec City nothing more than a crater, and it induced an eruption from the volcano known as Red Mountain, which coated Vardenfell and segments of mainland Morrowind in a layer of ash that, by all accounts, was inhospitable. This event was known as the Red Year, and resulted in an influx of Dunmer refugees fleeing their mainland to seek shelter. Many Dunmer found their way to Windhelm due to its close proximity to Morrowind. However, the Dunmer have not found Windhelm to be the home that they wished it was. The Grey Quarter is nothing short of a slum, with rickety houses and chipped-away stonework. Ulfric is seemingly unbothered by the condition with which the Dunmer are living in. Guards are not even sent to patrol the streets. When walking through the city, the immediate racism is apparent, as you can see 2 Nord men harassing a Dunmer woman as soon as you enter.
Maybe the reason these Greyskins don't help in the war is because they're Imperial spies.
Imperial spies? You can't be serious.
Maybe we'll pay you a visit tonight, little spy. We got ways of finding out what you really are.
You're a war hero, Brunwolf. Ulfric will listen to you.
It's not that simple. Ulfric wants Skyrim for the Nords. He doesn't trust what he calls outsiders.
You've seen how we live. Cramped alleys, run-down buildings, few guard patrols. Even the name Grey Quarter is an insult.
I'll speak to Ulfric soon, but I make no promises that I can change his mind.
That's all I ask. With your help, we have a chance to make a better life for ourselves here. For that, I thank you.
The Grey Quarter is not much to look at now, but it wasn't always so bad.
Windhelm is divided into 4 quarters. The Grey Quarter is the one that's home to all the city's dark elves. If it looks to you like an impoverished slum, that's because it is. Ulfric prefers that we live in squalor. He has nothing but disdain for anyone who isn't a Nord. He tolerates us, but that's the extent of his hospitality.
Well, you see where we have to live. This forgotten alley. All the filth from the upper quarters flows downhill, like they say. Good luck getting one of the guards to help with anything. I tried to get Ulfric to even come down here to see the squalor, but the High Lord of his mightiness couldn't find the time. Where else would we be? When the Red Mountain burned, you could scarcely breathe in Morrowind, so we came west. Windhelm was the first city on that road, and here we are. If we had known the Nords would be so unwelcoming, we may have kept walking. Farm work is hard work. It's good to relax when I can, but I still have to listen to my brothers harping about injustices. Of course working for Bolfridi isn't my first choice, but what else can a Dunmer do out here?
I'm a dark elf and I live in Windhelm, so yes, I live in the Grey Quarter. You must be new around here, or you'd know they don't let my kind live anywhere outside that slum.
A book in Skyrim known as Scourge of the Grey Quarter seems to be some sort of Nordic nationalistic propaganda intended to disenfranchise the Dunmer residents further. When paired with the book Nords Arise, which was written by a Stormcloak to recruit more to the cause, it is clear that the nationalism and, to be blunt, racism is rampant among the Nords in Windhelm. To think that the city of Ysgramor, whose very name was made in driving out the elves from our sacred home, would open itself as a welcome destination for any refugee from the smoking sulfur, is a disgrace to the very idea of being a Nord. Now, let's be very clear about one thing. There is no race in the Elder Scrolls franchise that does not have an issue with at least one other race. And the Dunmer on Vardenfell did not treat Outlanders with respect, but to treat the Dunmer in this fashion, I only wonder if the Ulfric from years prior would look at his current actions with pride or with distaste. When we look to the docks, we find the Argonian denizens of the city, who are not even allowed within the walls by Ulfric's decree, being forced to reside in the cold, tending to Nordic shipwrights and captains, unloading and loading their ships as they come and go.
I wish the Nords, Argonians, and Dark Elves in Windhelm got along better. We Argonians do the work the Nords don't want to do. We work where we can get work. The Nords don't like unloading their ships, so we do it instead. Sometimes cargo goes missing. I came here as a hatchling. The only thing colder than Skyrim is the Nords themselves, but we stick together.
It is a hard life to be a minority citizen in Windhelm under the rule of Ulfric Stormcloak. Now, does Ulfric write these books or actively take strolls through the Grey Quarter and the docks and make racist remarks about the Dunmer and Argonian people? No. But he certainly does nothing to stop the spreading of harmful literature and abusive citizens in his city. Now that we know the current state of affairs within his city, let's discuss the rebellion further. During the midst of the Stormcloak Rebellion, High King Istlad died. Not much is known about Istlad. We don't even have a date for his death, but we do know much about his son, Torrig. Upon Istlad's passing, a moot was convened, which is a Nordic tradition seemingly seldom used unless there is a dispute on who the next heir should be, wherein the Jarls of all the holds meet and debate the legitimacy of the High King. The title of High King was passed down to Torrig at the moot. Ulfric was at that moot, despite waging a civil war, and you can imagine there was some tension and he was not happy about the decision. Ulfric consistently refers to Torrig as a boy throughout dialogue pertaining to him. He saw Torrig as someone unfit to head the throne. The timeline on what comes next is, again, unclear, but at some point in 4th Era 201, Ulfric took a visit to the palace. Now at this point, it has been 18 years of civil war. What began as a few skirmishes here and there has now begun an all-out conflict. Torrig believed that Ulfric wished to meet him to discuss Skyrim's independence. However, Ulfric's intentions were more revolutionary. When greeted by the High King of Skyrim, Ulfric Stormcloak challenged Torygg to a duel, the details of which are varied and somewhat contradictory. According to Nordic tradition, if Torygg declined the duel, Ulfric would have had cause to convene a new moot. If Torygg accepted the duel, however, he was sure to lose. It was a double-edged sword if ever there was one, and honestly it was kind of a brilliant plan. Ulfric Stormcloak was a man of many talents. A student in the Way of the Voice, a veteran of the Empire in the Great War, a conqueror of the Kingdom of the Reach, and the Jarl of the city of Ysgramor. Torygg was destined to fail this fight. Many citizens you pass in the streets of Skyrim tell rumors about the goings-on in the game, claiming that Ulfric, quote, shouted him apart.
They say Ulfric Stormcloak murdered the High King with his voice, shouted him apart.
There are two accounts of this event that I would like to focus on, however. Sabil Stentor's and Ulfric's himself. Sabil Stentor was in the court the day that High King Torygg was killed and is a first-hand witness to what happened. She has this to say.
I was, to my shame. The whole court was in attendance. I've seen much in my time, but that was a gruesome day. Ulfric showed up at the Gates of Solitude requesting an audience. We thought he was here to ask Torygg to declare independence. By the time we realized Ulfric was here to challenge Torygg, it was already too late. By Nord custom, once the challenge was issued in court, Torygg had no choice but to accept. Had he not, Ulfric would have had cause to call a new moot and a new vote for High King. Torygg had some martial training, of course, but it mattered little that day. When Ulfric's lips parted, when he unleashed the power of the Thu'um, that shout, that ancient and terrible tongue, ripped Torygg asunder. Because Ulfric needed a symbol. Someone he could defeat that represented the Empire. The white gold concordat, the banning of Talos worship. Torygg's father Islot had held Skyrim together for nearly 25 years. When he died, Torygg became that symbol. No, even after Islot died, the moot voted to make Torygg High King of Skyrim. But Ulfric was at that moot, continually talking about Skyrim's independence in terms just shy of treason. I don't think Ulfric knew how much Torygg respected him for that. If Ulfric had asked Torygg directly to stand up, to declare independence, Torygg might have done it. Because the Dominion is a sleeping beast that Skyrim cannot slay alone. Because many Nords are part of the Imperial Army even now. Because the food and resources we get from the Empire are important to our people. Because even if we can't openly worship him, Talos the god was once Tiber Septim the man, and this is his empire. And Torygg wasn't ready to let it fall apart.
Back in Windhelm, if you approach Ulfric and ask him about High King Torygg, he is more than willing to talk to you about that fateful day from his own perspective.
Not entirely true, though not entirely false either. Any Nord can learn the way of the voice by studying with the Greybeards, given enough ambition and dedication. My shouting Torygg to the ground proved he had neither. However, it was my sword piercing his heart that killed him. We're fighting because we're done bleeding for an empire that won't bleed for us. Untold numbers of Nords died defending the Empire against the Dominion. And for what? Skyrim being sold to the Thalmor so the Emperor could keep his throne. We're fighting because our own Jarls, once strong, wise men, have become fearful and blind to the people's suffering. We're fighting because Skyrim needs heroes, and there's no one else but us. I killed Torygg to prove our wretched condition. How is the High King supposed to be the defender of Skyrim if he can't even defend himself? I challenged him in the traditional way, and he accepted. There were many witnesses. No murder was committed. True, he didn't stand a chance against me, but that was precisely the point. He was a puppet king of the Empire, not a High King of Skyrim. His father before him, perhaps, but not Torygg. He was too privileged and too foolish, more interested in entertaining his queen than ruling his country.
Sabil and Ulfric's account of what happened to Torygg's body differed, but they do agree on motive, actually. It would seem Sabine has a good beat on Ulfric's intentions. Sabine, who helped raise High King Torygg, claims that if Ulfric had simply tried to speak to Torygg about declaring independence, there was a good chance that Torygg may have listened, since he harbored a great deal of respect for Ulfric. Like I said, Ulfric was a hero, in a sense. In the Great War, he was a veteran. He had freed Markarth from the Reachman influence. We unfortunately will never know what Torygg may have done had Ulfric spoken to him, as the only place he can be found now is in Sovngarde, which I will note supports the notion that he did in fact accept Ulfric's challenge and died a true Nord death. Ulfric was allowed to escape the city since a guard at the gate by the name of Rogvir let him go. Rogvir, who would later be executed for allowing Ulfric to leave, claimed that there was no murder and that, quote, Ulfric challenged the High King in fair combat.
Rogvir, you helped Ulfric Stormcloak escape the city after he murdered High King Torygg. By opening that gate for Ulfric, you betrayed the people of Solitude.
He doesn't deserve to speak!
There was no murder. Ulfric challenged Torygg. He beat the High King in fair combat. Such is our way. Such is the ancient custom of Skyrim and all Nords.
Boo!
At this point, Ulfric's challenge to Torygg really should not be debated. We have now 3 witnesses whose stories all align. So, you can actually find High King Torygg in Sovngarde, like I said, and his spirit is wandering aimlessly through the mist that Alduin has kind of created there, the fog. And when you talk to him, he'll actually tell you about what happened. When Ulfric Stormcloak with savage shout sent me here, my sole regret was fair Elisif, left forlorn and weeping. I faced him fearlessly, my fate inescapable, yet my honor is unstained. Can Ulfric say the same? A few months after Torygg's death, Ulfric was captured in an imperial ambush, and he was brought to Helgen to be executed for his crimes. We all know what happens next. Ulfric was saved unintentionally by Alduin, the World Eater, but have you ever found it odd that General Tullius did not immediately execute Ulfric? I have. And before I thought that it was because Bethesda was just stupid when they wrote that scene, I'll be honest. Then I thought it was because they wanted to make Ulfric suffer by forcing him to watch his men beheaded. That could be closer to the truth, but if we look back at our friend the Thalmor dossier, it could perhaps tell us more. According to the dossier, the incident at Helgen is an example where an exception had to be made. Obviously, Ulfric's death would have dramatically increased the chance of an Imperial victory and thus harmed our overall position in Skyrim. It is my opinion that when Elenwen was speaking to Tullius in the beginning of the game, she told him something. Something that made him stay at the Executioner's Blade. Now, we know that the Thalmor were not responsible for Alduin attacking the city, but I believe they may have wanted Ulfric kept alive for questioning again, so perhaps they could let him go once more. I'm not exactly sure. Ulfric, now considered a dormant asset by the Thalmor, was still extremely valuable to them as he was disrupting the Empire's resources during the time where they had planned to be reconstructing. So long as the Empire is locked in a stalemate with Skyrim, the Thalmor are the true victors of the White Gold Concordant. So that's Ulfric Stormcloak's lore up until Elder Scrolls V truly begins. There are obviously more things that happen during the course of the game, but those are all impacted by the player character, and since the Civil War has 2 endings and it's impossible to know which one will be canon going forward, I figured that in this case we should keep this video to things that we strictly know about the character. So, Ulfric's card in Legends. Ulfric's card in Legends is very reminiscent of 2 key factors of his legacy. Number 1 is his time with the Greybeards, and number 2 is his ability to inspire his kinsmen. Ulfric's ability, of course, is that whenever a shout is played by you, you pull a random Nord from your deck. This, I think, is really interesting when you consider the fact that when Ulfric shouted Torygg, regardless of how he killed him, it inspired more of his kinsmen to join him in his cause, proving to them that he really was the true High King of Skyrim. Ulfric's card also has more attack than defense, and I think this really illustrates that he is a warrior, a hero, an inspirer before he is a tactician. Though he's not necessarily a poor tactician, it's kind of interesting in the Civil War part of the game, Tullius and Ulfric both have the exact same plan. There is like very little that's different between their game plans, which that I think might just be poor writing on Bethesda's side. But when you think about Ulfric, he has Galmar Stonefist, who we didn't really have time to talk about in this, but he is Ulfric's right-hand man. He's there talking through strategies with him and helping him. They're both staring at the map together when you first talk to Ulfric. So, not to say necessarily that Ulfric is a poor tactician, but it's just that he's got people around him that do that for him more. And I think that just personally, he is definitely more of a go-getter, kind of someone who's going to go out there and, in the case of Legends, he's going to be the guy that's going to smack you in the face. I also really love the art on this card. I've been using it throughout the video, so you've seen it in the background a bunch, and in the foreground too. The way that he's posed is like he's currently leading his troops into a battle that will lead some of them to Sovngarde for sure. You can see the Stormcloak banner in the background to show that this is him probably leading a battle sometime after the Dragonborn has joined his fight during the game, because not a whole lot of actual fighting has happened in the Civil War. It's been minor skirmishes and a few little things here and there. There's definitely been a rebellion, but there hasn't been a major battle. The Battle of Whiterun is a great example. That's something that happens on both sides of the war. Ulfric attacks Whiterun. And since we're at the end of the video here, I tried to keep most of the regular video about the lore very unopinionated. Some of the stuff with the Windhelm, the treatment of the minorities in Windhelm is very hard to showcase in a positive light, which is why I didn't even try to show it in a positive light at all. I think that Ulfric, at the end of the day, is a very, very interesting character. Regardless of your opinion about him, regardless of if you are a Stormcloak yourself, or if you side with the Imperials, or if you really just don't care about who wins the stupid Civil War, Ulfric is one of the most well-written characters in Skyrim, for sure. Skyrim is a little bit short on characters that have very complex things going on with them, but Ulfric is definitely one of the ones who's elevated more towards the top. So I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. I am going a little bit off script here. For most of this video, I had everything written down. So this was the first video that I ever did a script for. This was the first kind of attempt that I did at video essay writing, but I wanted to go a little bit, like I said, off script here, because I wanted this to be more in essence of my regular videos on the channel. And I just wanted to kind of ask you guys, how do you think I did? Did you enjoy the video? Do you have any thoughts on things that could have been done better? Did you just like it the way that it was? If there's anything that really stood out to you, please let me know. I mean, there's a lot of kind of data collection that I would like to have here. I tried to make this video a amalgamation of things that I'm interested in, and I really hope that that shines through. I think that videos are more enjoyable when the person who's making them clearly has a level of passion about it, and I hope that you were able to see some of that in the video regardless. So anyway, for the Legends fans that have been sticking around this far, the regular viewers of my channel, I will have a deck posted that is going to go along with this. It's going to be a thematic deck, a lot like the one that I did for the Tribunal Temple. If anyone saw that one a while back, it's going to be a deck that's more focused on the actual lore of the character of Ulfric Stormcloak. So it might not be the most consistent deck in the world or the best deck in the world even, but it will hopefully be fun to play, or interesting at least to see. So that will be up at some point. So yeah, I don't think that I have a whole lot more to say about that. I'd love to talk to you guys a little bit more down in the comments section. I'll try to post in the description when I have the Ulfric Legends video done. Hopefully it will be done at the same time that this video is finished. But yeah, I don't have too much more to say. So I'll see you guys around on the internet. I'll talk to you later. Peace out. Have a good weekend.